Understanding the app designer is key when working in Tocker. To create an application, you can see we have our automation and our applications on the two sides of the screen inside of the Projects tab. To create a new application, we can either click the New button in the top right hand corner here of this particular section, or we can click on the Create an App button, and here we have a little description telling us what it is an app actually is. Clicking on Create an App, we're then prompted to provide some details. I'm going to call my app Demo Application. We can see we have an app slug, which is just giving us an automatically generated URL for the application that we're going to be creating. I'm going to go with this one. We can click on Next, and we're then prompted if we want to restrict access to our application. If you're creating an application that you want to have a login page, or you want to authenticate users via SSO, this is a good place to begin enabling those settings. Ticking the box, we're then prompted for a few things. The first is to create a secret for our application, which we can generate by clicking this button to the right hand side. If we have an existing app team, or if not, it will prompt us to automatically create one, which is what it's going to do currently. And if we want to have a username and password login, or something else, like I said, you can have some form of SSO from a provider such as Google or Microsoft or whoever you prefer, then you can select those settings here. For me, I'm going to go with username and password. Using these options, we can decide if we want newly created users to require approval once they register before they can actually log into the application. And then once they're logged in, where they should be navigated to. I'm going to leave that blank and I'll populate that later with a login page. Clicking on Next, we're then prompted to see if we want to add any resources. If you have an existing automation project, you can select your data stores from the top here, and any listeners or CMS that you may have. I don't have any at the moment, so I'm going to click on Next. And finally, it's going to ask me if I'm ready to create my demo app, which I am. Clicking on Create, it brings us to our app overview. Here we can see immediately the two pages that are already been created for us. We have a home page and we have a My Account page. We also have a list of other tabs. We have Resources for quick access to any data stores, listeners or CMS that we may have linked to this particular project. A CMS, which allows you to create file systems to actually use within your applications. If you have any independent files that maybe you've linked through the Resources or CMS tabs. Any users in your applications with the ability to create custom groups and roles. Theming options, which have been covered more in depth in other videos. And then overall settings, where again we can start to see some of the similar settings that we saw earlier, such as the name, the app slug. We could provide a favicon to display in the tab of a browser. We can configure our authentication, our app resources, where we'd like to deploy to, search engine optimization, and miscellaneous settings. Returning back to pages, I'm going to click on the home page to open up the canvas so we can begin editing our application. We can see that it's asking me in the middle of the screen to add a layout component to get started, and this is currently because we haven't added anything to our page. But before we do, I'll give you a quick overview of all the settings that you can see on the screen. On the left hand side, we have three options to expand out. We've got the components, which are independent pieces that you can put together to create different applications. We have layouts, as well as blocks. You can pause to read the item descriptions for each of these. Along the top of the screen, we can see we have the tab that we're currently looking at, which is our home page, as well as any other pages that we could view here, or we can quickly open up a new page. We can see we're in the app designer, and we're currently editing the draft version of our application. We can see any users who are editing, which in this case is myself. We can preview the page, which gives us a quick snapshot as to how this will look when it's deployed. And deploying an application allows it to be accessible via the open internet. This button allows you to actually deploy the application. Here we can quickly jump into our page settings. So this allows us to edit the name of the page itself. We can restrict access if we actually want to only allow certain user groups and roles to actually interact with this content. We can also set the height of the modal as well as the width of the modal. And a modal is a version of a page that we'll use as a pop-out in some scenarios. We also have the app settings, as we saw previously, as well as viewports, allowing you to edit your applications for different platforms. So here's an example of a mobile view and a tablet view. For now, we're going to stick with desktop. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have our properties pane, our Explorer pane, and our viewports. Our properties will allow us, once we add a component to the page, such as a flex layout, to then see more specific configurations of that particular component. Our Explorer allows us to see, out of all the things that we have on our page currently, where they live in relation to one another. As an example, if I were to add a text component to the page by clicking, dragging and dropping, we can see that we have the root of the page at the top, and within that is a flex, and within that flex we have the text that we just added. And inside of our text we could add some words. Along with some rich formatting options. And then at the bottom we have viewports, allowing us to say that if we've made any changes between a mobile view, a tablet view, or a desktop view, they can be independent of each of those versions. So for example, you could create your base application in the desktop viewport and then customize it for mobile, with those changes being held separately in the viewports tab for mobile specifically.